Well, hi ho! Bringing you Block Digest number 125 on Sunday, September 16th at block height 541,690. So what's going on?
Oh, nothing, man. Bright and sunny day, sipping the tea, thinking about 25 episodes past 100. It sounds kind of crazy. Yeah, sounds like you wanted to go back 100 to episode 25. And I don't even think we were in the 400,000. Maybe we were. I have to go back and check that out. How are you doing today, Janine?
Well, you could argue that companies like Google are involved in this middle business of moving information from people who have it to people who want it. And the problem I saw is that this first step was crippled, and often the last step as well when it came to information that governments were inclined to censor. Does anyone know what that's a quote from?
Bob Saget.
No.
I was going to laugh. I'd say I have no clue.
Well,
who was it?
Spill the beans.
I'll put the transcript in the chat box.
Aha.
Man himself.
I just thought, since we're talking about Google twice today, might as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, and just a heads up, guys. I guess my first story isn't really directly related to crypto, and Janine's kind of is, kind of isn't, but
audio listeners, that was Julian Assange's quote.
But I just felt like I really had to bring this up on the show today, just because when you really kind of try to narrow things just to Bitcoin or cryptocurrency, you're kind of missing the bigger picture. Like these are effectively internet protocols that have just a total dependency on the internet right now, and the stack of protocols that make the internet work. And there's really just over the last 10 or 20 years been a real blurring line between the impartiality of those protocols themselves and major companies that actually provide services built on top of them. And it's really just over the last 2 decades gotten to a point where it's kind of hard to differentiate them in a material way in terms of how people actually access and navigate the internet. And you really can't just look at Bitcoin or crypto in a vacuum and not really look at how a lot of the larger issues on the internet are going to affect things for Bitcoin. I mean, until we really get crazy cypherpunk and get a lot of these ideas built out, like more people doing things like Blockstream satellite feed, radio relays, mesh networks, like Bitcoin is pretty much completely dependent on the internet. And so whatever happens on the internet is of serious importance to what's going to happen to Bitcoin. And Google has been doing a lot of really shady things since it started as a company. Like they started off, just as the search engine, and really rapidly started expanding out from there. And they've done a huge amount of good for the world. But over the last 10 or 15 years, they've just completely started twisting in on themselves to the point where I don't even recognize what they are as a company. And they've just kind of found themselves doing the exact opposite of what they set out to do, which is actually improve the world, improve people's lives. And, 2 days ago, there's a piece written on The Intercept about this project Dragonfly that they've been working on for China. And I mean, initially, when Google's relationship with China developed, I saw it as something to kind of respect when they pulled out of the country, like their attitude towards China and where they were going in terms of censorship was kind of a fuck you. And they pretty much tried to leverage their infrastructure and their network effect to kind of strong arm China. And then somewhere after that, they just lost their backbone. Like they started weaseling in to China again, started making what I saw even at the time as just horrible concessions to the kind of censorship and just dystopian totalitarian nonsense that the Chinese government was doing. And it was one of quite a few turning points that you could really point to as an example of when Google just completely threw the entire ethos the company was supposedly founded on out the window. And this Dragonfly program is pretty much the nail in the coffin for that ethos in just a completely final term. Like there is no excusing this. There is no trying to spin this around as establishing leverage or doing what we have to do to try to improve the situation in China. And like this program is effectively a search engine being designed specifically for China, specifically for Android devices sold in China, hooked into an unnamed Chinese company in a partnership, and pretty much blacklisting any search term that the Chinese government wants to. In addition to this, they're moving in a direction of tying your mobile phone number to every single search that you make. So they're pretty much just building out a search engine for the Chinese government and giving them total control over whatever is to be blacklisted. It's effectively hard-coded into the search engine. The unnamed, air quote, Chinese company that they're partnered with has total control over what they add or remove to the blacklist. It's going to tie your phone number to every single search request you make. And Google is pretty much building out a fucking mass surveillance system and handing it to the Chinese government on a platter. And I mean, there is no justification for this. There is no chess move here. There is no throwing their weight around in a game of politics. They are literally down on their knees building out the fucking dystopian nightmare system for the Chinese government. Like, this is it. Like, this is, like, fuck Google. Like, they have completely taken every bit of their ethos, their morality, their ethics, and they have just thrown it on the ground, pissed on it, and lit it on fire. And the final cherry on the top here is it's not just search results. It's not just tagging people and tracking them by their phone number correlated to their search results. They've actually also directly plugged in to an unnamed Chinese company, which is also hard-coded, their weather report system, which in China is going to be dealing with things like pollution levels, the smog levels in major cities. And the Chinese government has a long history of lying about these bits of information and fudging the data to try to make things look better than it actually is. And like, yeah, I mean, like what? This is just so many levels of fucked up on the surface. But I mean, to really look at a lot of the inner machinations of this company and how they kind of started walking down this path. I mean, there was a time when Sergey and Brin, the founders, were pretty much directly running the company. And somewhere along the line, around when they brought Eric Schmidt in, they started getting sidelined more and more and more. Started being removed from the actual decision making of the company. And like this just really has me questioning what was really going on there. Like what were the actual factors that led to their waning influence, and who exactly and what strings behind the people running the company now is steering this company's direction? Because this just you cannot excuse this the way that Google has excused a large number of questionable actions they've made in the past, which was making concessions to be able to do the good they could still do, to pretty much throw their corporate weight around on the stage of politics to attempt to influence countries. Like, no, this is them just throwing in the towel and becoming the Chinese government's bitch, doing their dirty work for them. So why? Like, why would they do this? And I can't really look at this any other way except just beta testing. Like taking an environment where they could actually deploy a system like this and testing it for wider use, to fine tune it, to see how it would work. And I mean, it's just look around. Look around at the situation on the internet in China for the past 20 years. Look at what's going on right now in the European Union. Look at the situation that people have had to deal with in the Middle East, or the steps that they've taken to try and kind of pull this shit in the United States. SOPA, PIPA, the Trans-Pacific Trade Treaty, and all the intellectual property rider clauses, copyright clauses that would have had huge effect on what can and can't be done on the internet. I mean, it's blatantly obvious that very powerful interests in the world right now are trying to balkanize the internet. They're trying to fragment it. They're trying to impede the flow of information. They're trying to lock it down. They're trying to turn it into one gigantic circle of walled gardens that you cannot get into without every single thing you do being tied to your real name, your identity, tagged and tracked, thrown in a database and correlated so that they can just sift through every tiny digital interaction that you have with other people, with information. Just like this is what's going on right now. This is what is happening to the internet. And like people in this ecosystem need to wake up. They need to stop just laser focusing, to make a pun, on Bitcoin itself and the progress being made to actually make it a scalable, sustainable system. Because right now, Bitcoin is completely dependent on the internet. Without completely building new physical infrastructure that is not dependent on the internet that Bitcoin can run on, it can't exist without the internet. And just look around at what's happening to the fucking internet. Like, this is not something that we can ignore and just keep our head down and go, Schnorr signatures, Lightning Network, man. This is fucking awesome. Yeah, it is awesome. But none of this is going to mean jack shit if the course being taken right now, as far as what is being done to the internet, follows through to its natural end. It won't matter because it won't be able to keep functioning.
Yeah, that sounds pretty dystopian, and I understand, like, yeah, it is serious, and, you know, we should probably be taking it more seriously. I'm seeing in the chat a pretty big pushback, you know, like we're on YouTube, and YouTube is funded by Google, and, you know, so, like, I can understand it's like this is where the information is currently disseminated, and, yeah, I mean, like, this is kind of a progression in two separate directions, and I honestly think, like, we're kind of rubber banding back already with things like Bitcoin. I think that we're getting the tools to fight back. I think, like you were saying, you know, this has been a, you know, multiple decade process, you know, a couple of decades here. And, you know, over that time, we've seen some of these things, not just with the internet. I mean, like we saw drones killing people in Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Yemen, Somalia, all these little countries where, you know, they can't stand up and fight back for themselves. And eventually we did see an American citizen shot with a drone. And now drones are pretty heavily politicized here in the United States. I mean, like, if you get into discussion about that, there's a lot of, well, we don't know which way to think, but obviously this isn't a good thing whenever you have American citizens that are afforded due process and then they aren't and they're killed. And, you know, Google's whole starting off on don't be evil and then evolving to this current state of Dragonfly, you know, monitoring all this information and issuing scores for censorship. And I mean, like, while it's really disturbing, I think similarly, if they tried to implement this thing in countries that are freer, that have more civil liberties tied to them, then I think they would get a heavy pushback still. Like, I don't even think they could think about implementing this sort of thing yet. And with, like I'm saying, with the tools like Bitcoin, you know, it can really give, basically out of this World Wide Web internet that we're operating in, it gives constituency to people that are, you know, fighting in the opposite direction. And that's one of the main reasons why, yeah, I'm in Bitcoin, is because it is like a big, you know, pushback in all this like stripping of people's individual rights and liberties, and you know, right to privacy is definitely in there. So I mean, like, yeah, I do share your urgency to the fact that this is a big problem, but I also kind of share, like, have this viewpoint that, like, you know, we're already kind of rubber banding back. I'm not saying don't fight. Like, it is definitely the fight. Like, I constantly talk about how we should probably be doing, not constantly, but I do mention how we should be doing multiple streams and, you know, uploads for possible censorship and all that sort of stuff. I mean, like, we have the tools, we have the knowledge now to understand what the problem is and a way around it, to where I think we are moving in the other direction at the same time that they're pushing real hard that way in certain regions of the world where it's obviously going to be something that there's not going to be much pushback on. If they tried that somewhere like around the US, the UK, I mean, Italy, any of these countries, like, you know, Switzerland, Sweden, you try to do a drone strike over there, let's see what happens. You know, let's start issuing a political score for every American citizen. Let's see what happens. I mean, like, there's going to be some major pushback in that direction. And with the tools like Bitcoin, I mean, you could be pushing them in that direction quicker.
Well, I mean, you know, I really want to kind of address real quick the boycott YouTube thing and BitChute, which was brought up in the chat. I mean, this is exactly what I meant at the beginning of that rant when I said those lines between the neutral protocol stack that actually keeps the internet running at a technical level and these big services that are built on top of it just blurring. I would love to get off YouTube. But you know what? The simple fact of the matter is it has the network effect. This is where people are. If I actually want to reach people, have them hear me, I have to be here because this is where everybody is. Like, this is the exact same dynamic that is going to make Bitcoin work if these problems don't go to their nightmarish conclusion. The network effect. It's not a joke. Network effect is almost impossible to unseat or to replicate. That's the whole underlying dynamic underneath all of these things. And I would love to, but that's not practical if I want to get what I'm saying in front of other people so they can think about it. And BitChute, like, it's an awesome platform, but look at what's happening to all these other platforms being built. How many times has Gab AI had their hosting provider threatened to shut the entire service down because of one post on the platform? How much shit do you see on fucking Twitter? Kill white people, or just insanely crazy racist shit, or just off the wall nonsense. Dude, nope, they're fine. Any other provider they use isn't going to threaten them. They have the money to build their own fucking backend. Like, it's not the same for upstarts like this. BitChute, they had their fucking payment processor just close their account. The people on that platform can't accept money right now. Like, these are serious issues that are not going to be solved just by leave YouTube. That's all that's going to do is take the people who are aware of these things, trying to get other people to pay attention to them, to think about them, and isolating them from all of the people who need to be made aware of these things. Like that's not going to fix this problem.
Oh, like just like that before, I really feel like, this is something where we're going through a situation right now where we could kind of put an eye on it and say, like, this is what's happening when this when censorship happens in the West. Like, I'm gonna bring this up and let's see how crazy it really is. Like, Alex Jones and InfoWars was the first thing to be censored here in the West, and maybe for good reason. Like, I've been listening to that discussion a lot about the mania and like how powerful could that be in today's age. But I am with you in like censoring information is like that's just something that we should be fighting at all costs. And like we're kind of right here in the middle of this right now, where I'm saying like, let's see if they try to do that somewhere here. And they killed an American citizen with a drone in Yemen, but they did censor him here in the United States and his channel and everything they're trying to put forward. And they did that through it was kind of said a while back that it's like the government is going to eventually get the corporations to do their censoring for them. And I mean, like, they've done this through vague terms of service and not really wanting to stand up and say, well, this is what caused it. I mean, like, they have said that it had a lot to do with, that school shooting. But, there was some more stuff rolled up into that they don't exactly want to detail out, because I imagine if they did, it would show that, like, they're really just trying to suppress speech and not really trying to suppress mania and outrage. I mean, we've seen the mainstream media just like blare outrage and, try and entice violence for a long time now. So, I mean, this is an example that we could talk about now as far as, and I see it taking effect where, Alex Jones's app that's being sold on, or that's being, distributed through, I guess, the Google Play Store and the Apple App Store, it's supposedly got a large amount of downloads since the censorship. And I really feel like, when you push people in a corner, you're going to see a rubber band back the other direction. And I mean, this really kind of scares me because of the fact of, this guy can, get some people riled up. And if you throw him into a corner with a bunch of other people that already think they're getting thrown into a corner by the way that the mainstream media talks about the people that they elected into office, it really, I kind of fear like what that pushback will be, but I definitely think it's getting pushed back. I mean, it is splitting their network. I mean, like, that's probably why they were so hesitant to do it. It's not like they did it right after he started talking about the school shooting. They did it years after. And they did that because, they're weighing and measuring and testing. And it's almost like this whole regulation stuff we see where it's like they put out a headline and feel out the market and then push it back. And will this guy remain censored here in the West? I mean, I don't know. And I mean, like, the whole Article 13 thing going on there in the UK. I mean, we are seeing censorship here. And I mean, like, this happened just recently, all this stuff. So I think we are going to see a pushback. It might be something that the mainstream wants. It might be something that, is a little bit more than they were expecting. And they could create like this pretty powerful entity based on free speech and sovereign financial freedom. So I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, it's really hard to see if there would be a reaction, like, would we move this direction without something to cause a reaction to move that direction? I mean, like, the internet was built out to be decentralized, but we naturally centralize the information. So does it take something terrible like this to cause a reaction for us to actually split it back up? That's I don't know. It's a big theoretical question there, I guess.
See, my main worry, sorry, real quick, Jenny, is like, I don't want to see this backlash so hard that you start seeing crazy government regulation on companies like this and what they can and can't do, because that's exactly what I think they want. Because once they get that foot in the door with regulation, now they have a government hand in these companies, and they can start fine tuning that regulation, not to defend free speech, but to start pushing this shit even harder with the government behind it.
Yeah, I think that they're going to take a pretty big hit from that. I mean, it's kind of like the news is sort of, some people are taking it as good, some people as bad. But yeah, I mean, I really think they're going to see a hit on that. I mean, like Elon Musk's stock at Tesla took a hit for him smoking a hit of cannabis on the Joe Rogan show. And I mean, like, if anything, I think this is just showing how irrational the market still is. Like, if you don't understand that cannabis is not nearly as destructive as alcohol, and, you know, you're going to actually sell a guy's stock because he took a hit of cannabis. But I mean, this is just, yeah, market irrationality. I mean, yeah, I mean, hopefully they'll just learn once they make this kind of decision that this is not good. The market doesn't want this. And, you know, we'll see a major pushback. I mean, like I'm saying, it's not that bad right now. They're kind of, everybody's like, I don't know how I feel about it. I'm still seeing Alex Jones here and there. And is he really censored? Is he not? How bad is this? And, you know, maybe it will take like some mass shadow banning, you know, like some more of that and some more of just channels getting shut down through weird algorithms before the market does start being so irrational. But I mean, like, just that example, I mean, like the fact that people went to go sell Tesla stock because the guy hit one small hit of cannabis and didn't even inhale. It's like one of those things you have to do in front of Joe Rogan almost. And it's like, yeah, people start selling stuff. I don't think he really inhaled. He might have inhaled like the smallest little bit. But for the most part, I think he just kind of like tasted it and let it back out. But, you know, the market says that's a big no-no. And I'm going to go sell my stock that, you know, could make me money in the future just based upon that decision. And yeah, that's I think, you know, right now they're just acting same thing as irrational when it comes to right to privacy. And it might be some more, a little bit longer down the road and a little bit more, you know, Orwellian nightmare before we actually see that pushback. But, you know, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's kind of scary because it's like, you know, usually large groups of people, it feels like don't actually push back till they're way in a corner and it gets violent. So I hope that's not the end goal really. But yeah, Google starting off from don't being evil to this, that's a pretty, you know, it's pretty bad, but it's kind of like you're saying, you know, way back then, I mean, they might have already been, you know, probing to get their way in there to get this censorship the way they'd like. But really, again, I think you're going to see groups of people with financial sovereignty pushing back, and it's going to be a little bit more than they had thought they would get on pushback, because I imagine they thought before the world of Bitcoin, like, yeah, you know, if they do push back, you know, we'll just shut them down. I mean, they've been doing that for a while now with protests and everything. But now with Bitcoin and, you know, moving censorship resistance, store of value, and, you know, just having that ability is going to be a lot more powerful tool. And it's something where I don't know if they were really expecting that sort of thing to be in play. So, you know, I mean, it's something you just wait and see, and definitely, you know, discuss with your friends and push back whenever you think it's something that is a violation of your rights and individual sovereignty. It's not something that we should just sit back and listen to, because it does make me feel like the days whenever I imagine there was large groups of people in Germany being accused for something because it was like they just sort of sat by while something happened. And it's like, you know, that could happen again. I mean, it could be a situation where, you know, there's a large group, large country being, you know, chastised because they just sat back and watched something happen. So, you know, don't just be quiet about it, for sure.
Well, the more interesting thing about that Elon Musk incident was actually that there was a woman claiming that she used to work in one of his factories, and she was let go because she was using medical marijuana, and that was supposed like I don't know if she was tested while she was actually at work or something, but she was let go because they thought she might have been using the medical marijuana while she was on the factory floor. So a bit of hypocrisy there, if that's true. But yeah, the idea that Google, like, this is not a new thing to people who have been following what they've actually been doing for a long time. Like the quote that I mentioned at the beginning of the show was from when Google met WikiLeaks, and that was in June 2011. And so lots of people were already aware that Google was already straying off this path of don't be evil way before this time. And also the idea that, like, I really don't give a shit about Alex Jones, and he's far from being the first person to be censored across the board on, you know, social media platforms or even in the United States or anything like that. He's not the first, and he won't be the last. And also the idea that the stuff that Google is doing is not going to come back to the US, or isn't, like some of us already know, is in the US already. It's just not as transparent as what they're doing with the Chinese government. Yeah, you're going to get a wake-up call soon, because what most of these governments and companies do is that they first test technology or tactics in other countries where they can do it with impunity, and they can fully test it to, you know, whatever extent they want to, and they won't get any pushback. Like, of course, Google going into China, they won't get any pushback because, one, they're an American company, they're not even a Chinese company, and two, because, well, China is a bit of an authoritarian nightmare, at least more than the US is. So they won't get any pushback. They'll get to test it out. And then they'll think, well, let's do more of that in the US, because, you know, it's not like Google doesn't already have a bunch of, you know, secret partnerships with intelligence services. It's not like their entire advertising surveillance model doesn't already tie into that by default, even without the partnerships. So Google's, you know, whole business model at the very core is all in favor of this kind of stuff, even if they didn't realize it 10 years ago. They were already building stuff that was serving the interests of these governments. So, yeah. And I mean, obviously, Google has had more influence over the United States in the area of surveillance technology than they have had in China, because they're actually here as a domestic American company. So, yeah, the idea that they're not already doing a lot of this stuff, or even worse, in the US, you'd be surprised. They may not be tying your search history, you know, directly into the search engine with your phone number in practice on everyone, but I'm sure, you know, every time you use the Google search engine, it's not too many steps away, because it's not like Google doesn't have a way to connect those two things anyway when you're, you know, using these devices that can talk to each other silently without you hearing it. Like, a lot of these devices, the way that they figure out that, you know, how you tie them together to get, you know, a consistent service over both of them, is that they talk to each other. That's just what they do. And it's, you know, seen as like, oh, you're improving the service that Google gives you. It's like, no, this is all about tracking. It's, I mean, if that's their intention, then they're like, there's a part of being evil where you may not even have the intention to be evil, but you're so deliberately blind to all of the risks and all of the pitfalls of what you're doing that you might as well just be intending to be evil, because the effects of your actions are exactly that, and you're just ignoring them because whatever reason. So Google has either, if they don't have the intention, they've been definitely willfully blind to their own evil for a long time. So none of this surprises me. It doesn't surprise me that they're deliberately building surveillance technology for the Chinese government. I mean, they've basically been building surveillance technology for their own purposes. So why not give it to governments? Like, it's not too far away. And of course, it's easy for them. You know, I saw a quote from Sergey Brin actually recently, where he said that Trump was fascist, and it's like, well, it doesn't even matter if I agree or disagree with you on that, because you're directly serving authoritarians in other countries. Does that not matter to you? Or does it not matter because in one instance you're talking about a fascist who may affect the lives of American citizens, where in the other hand, it's affecting people on the other side of the world that you don't have to care about because you're not a Chinese company? That's where you really see where people's morals lie, is when they divide humanity into these stupid tribal groups, and they think that their ethics can be divided in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, Alex Jones is definitely not the first guy censored. I mean, I would imagine like the first mass censorship was WikiLeaks and Julian Assange when it comes to these new internet infrastructures and data, data being spread out. I mean, like that was probably the first major censorship. And like G. Willikers saying in chat, the NSA and all these these tools are available and they're being used, but it does take like people being aware of them before you actually see a reaction. And I do understand that, like there was a big audience for WikiLeaks and Julian Assange for a long time, but it is like under the fear of what this government infrastructures are doing. Like, I mean, the way they are infiltrating these companies, the way they are killing American citizens with drones, and the way that all this stuff behaves. I mean, like the way they won't arrest people that throw hundreds of millions of people out of their houses and take their money. I mean, these are situations where, I mean, like we understand the fear and the reality of like the pushback. I mean, standing up and talking about Bitcoin on a show was something that for a long time I was real hesitant about because of that thought that they might come try to knock me down or something. And it's just like a lot of people live in that fear, and it is a lot of like that until you're pushed really hard into a corner, you don't actually push back. And I think that takes like it takes evidence, like large amounts of evidence. And it was like Julian Assange and all that is definitely clear, but it was like a lot of people were still very, I don't know. It just felt like people didn't know the Edward Snowden information hadn't come out yet. It took a while for people to process that. I mean, it feels like because of this current situation with the censorship, it just feels like the pushback is actually coming because of the amount of people that actually see it as like not just something that's there, but it's being used, and it's being used against people that could be them. I mean, it takes, maybe your actual neighbor getting shut down before people start coming together with amounts of Bitcoin and, trying to push back and do something about it. So, I mean, yeah, it's definitely not the first, but it's like just in all these major developments, I think that one is one where similarly to the guy in Yemen who was killed with the drone, I think would just stir enough discussion to where it could start to push back on them. Because after that Yemen assassination, like drone news and information and all that stuff was getting heavily suppressed. And I mean, that might happen again. I mean, this is the people we're facing. They're strong enough to suppress this stuff. So it's a hard fight. It's not like everybody could be held accountable, like they understand the whole situation from the ground up right now. I mean, yeah, that's why we're here talking.
I mean, I wouldn't even say that WikiLeaks was the first major target of censorship in the West either. That was I really wouldn't. Like, I think there's a long history of that going on. I mean, you can go all the way back to the time where it was considered illegal to post cryptography on the internet because it was considered munitions, and that was in the 90s. So we can, but yeah, and what was the thing I was gonna say? Damn it, Shinobi, do you have anything? I have to remember my point.
Rabble rouser. Something. Google is a piece of shit now.
Oh, I remembered. So, Rick, you were saying that like we need something more to like get people to understand that they need to push back, but like it's kind of funny because even people that I know who talk about like privacy concerns and stuff on a daily basis and say that Google is an issue, it's actually hard for me to even convince them to fully get off Google. Like, I'm usually around people who use Google Maps to find restaurants. Like, they'll walk around with it open. You're basically telling Google your location the entire time. You're telling them exactly what you're looking for. And when I bring this up to them, they think like I'm annoying, that like, well, how do you, it's like, there's plenty of alternatives. There's this thing called OpenStreetMaps. Like, there's plenty of alternatives to Google that people can use, but for some reason people aren't willing to migrate off of those. And like, the fact that, I mean, we are using YouTube right now, which is a Google service, but there are aspects of it that we've deliberately decided not to use. For example, we're never going to turn on ads because duh. Like, first of all, you won't get any money from that. And also it's just ethically a black hole to get that advertising money. But it's amazing how many people even the ones who care about privacy a lot, they're still like struggling to completely get off Google. And I don't see why it's so hard, because like some of the alternatives that I use are even better. Like the reason I use YouTube is just because there really isn't a good alternative at the moment in terms of like getting, being able to manage this scale of videos and easily post them publicly and stuff like that. But everything else, there is a better alternative. And so I don't,
Well, I mean, like I feel you like completely, because I'm in your camp. I'm like thinking of a new cell phone, and I'm like, should I go the Janine route and flip phone, no smartphone, totally just sort of blackout? And then another part of me is like, well, maybe I should go Project Fi and limit where my information is being spilled from, like all through Google instead of like through Google and Verizon. It's like my choices suck both directions. I mean, like it's like I could limit my abilities a lot, but I mean, see, that's where it's like maybe I'm just like questioning, like I need to question more how much that would limit my abilities, because really like the flip phone thing does sound like a good idea, just because it would also free up stress and my time and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's a weird decision-making process for sure. It's something that I feel I'm in that camp that you're talking about.
Well, I wouldn't even recommend the only reason you would want a flip phone is if you're in a situation where you don't need any of the services or whatever offered by a smartphone, but you need some kind of emergency phone. Like, I wouldn't even recommend a flip phone for regular use. I would just have it as a thing, like if you need to call someone, like in an emergency, you have a phone, or if someone needs to call you. But I wouldn't recommend it for like regular use, because most flip phones, like you would have to heavily modify them in order to, install software that allows you to do encrypted messaging and stuff like that, where that kind of thing is easy it's easier with a smartphone to do that. So if you're at a point where you don't really need a smartphone and you're not really in a situation where you think you'll need to get emergency calls, then maybe keep a flip phone just for emergency calls, but just get a phone out of your life. Like, you don't actually need it. For most people, their phone is just a distraction in their daily life. It's not something that they actually need.
Yeah, that's something I'm starting to figure out, and I think you're right. It's definitely the smarter move, but yeah, it's hard to do whenever you think about how productive you could be with these other devices and everything. But it's a hard decision. But yeah, I think you're right about it'd probably be for the best to just sort of wait to make the phone call and just sort of keep something for emergencies and everything. It's just like that's the form of protest nowadays. It's like buy Bitcoin, do that. And I mean, like we are seeing a market pop up, right? Like there are some phones that are like secure, like they're marketed as encrypted. And I mean, and those things are selling. So I mean, like, yeah, the rubber band's happening. How long is it going to take? How far is it going to go before we actually push back? It's anybody's guess, but it's definitely something where it's bad, but keep in mind that we have tools and we have decisions that could help us move this thing back. Let's just do it.
Mm-hmm. All right, there's everybody should know what that sound means. We've been going on this for like 45 minutes. So you want to take us into the next one, Janine?
Yeah, I mean, it's very much related to, sociopaths who build surveillance infrastructure who end up having, really terrible personal skills. And one of those people, who is now actually a former Google employee, at least according to his resume, is this guy named Adam Singer. And he came up as a story today because many of you, if you follow Jameson Lopp, you probably heard about the fact that I think it was last year. Was it earlier this year or was it last year? Yeah, it was last year, October 2017. Yeah. Jameson was he was a victim of swatting, but it could have been a lot worse. He was the victim of swatting where an anonymous caller basically got, a SWAT team to go to his house, a whole team of really heavily armed police to go to his house because the person was claiming that there was a hostage situation at his house, and luckily he was not home. He was actually, I think he was at a racquetball gym or something, so he wasn't even home. So luckily nothing happened, and he actually came home and he's like, what's going on? And they're like, oh, there's a hostage situation. He's like, oh, that's my house. So luckily nothing happened because he was away, but it could have easily been a deadly situation, because if you're following, for most people outside the US, this probably looks completely insane. Like I've heard from people who just don't believe this even happens, because in a lot of other parts of the world, it's not possible. It would take an extreme case where police would show up that heavily armed at someone's house just because they got an anonymous call. Like, this doesn't usually happen outside of the US. So people don't believe it, but it does happen. You can basically just call. You don't even have to be in the same area. Like you can be in a completely different state, and you can call the police and say, this address, something's happening, and they will send like a SWAT team to that person's house. And so that's what happened to Jameson Lopp. And he will actually be giving a talk at the Baltic Honey Badger conference that's coming up. I think his talk is titled Extreme OPSEC. And he's apparently managed. I'm trying to load the list, but everything is being very slow. He made a tweet about how he's going to give this talk, and he's going to show people how they can live without, this list of, I think it was 7 things, a list of things that most people have in their life, like a credit card and a phone and a driver's license and a car, and like how I'm assuming he's going to point out the security risks of having those, and, what information you're sharing when you have to, get those documents or use those services. And this guy named Adam Singer, who, according to his resume, was managing the Google Analytics branch, made a bunch of comments on Twitter about how, oh, look at this guy, everything is out to get you. Governments and banks are going to collapse at any moment. It must be so exhausting being, such a pessimistic person that you have to like basically live under a bridge. And he didn't apparently know. He had to be reminded that Jameson Lopp had been swatted, and that was driving most of his, that was his motivation to explore, like, how do I get all of these services out of my life that I don't really need and may actually be of personal risk to me. And Adam Singer just made this comment like, oh, I have no idea who that guy is. I'm sorry. I don't keep a record of random Twitter users. I guess that's one way to do it, though. That's one way to do it, is to get rid of these services. And he said, you could also maybe hire a lawyer like an adult. And it's like, well, guess what? Jameson he did act like an adult, whatever that means. And I think there's actually an FBI or investigation going on to this day, because they haven't found out who it is somehow. There's still an investigation going on to this day, and nothing has happened. And I don't exactly know how hiring a lawyer would exactly solve the situation, because, I mean, if you've read any of the other stories about people getting swatted or almost swatted, these law enforcement agencies basically act with total impunity, and they're not responsible for, at least most of the time. I think I've only seen one case where a police officer in a SWAT team situation like that was actually, he was actually given charges for things he had done based on a false report. But most of them act with total impunity, and they can't, there's nothing you can do about it. So the idea that you can just call a lawyer, it's like you really don't understand the situation. And so because Adam has been a person that I've seen his tweets often, and it seems like there's a couple of people in the Bitcoin space who follow him and sometimes like his tweets, and I really don't understand why, because he just comes across to me as a total dick, and in so many different ways. And the fact that you would mock someone who literally, Jameson has a family, his family could have gotten hurt, he could have gotten hurt. Why would you mock a person who is in such a stressful situation like that? It doesn't make any sense. But to be fair, I have very rarely met a current or former Google employee who didn't have some kind of something repellent about them on a very deep moral level. So I'm not honestly surprised by his behavior. mocking swatting victims does not even make the list of very low things that I've seen Google do or Google employees do. So it doesn't surprise me, but I just wanted to bring this up because obviously the stuff with Google in China is being talked about right now. And I just wanted to give this other example of someone, you know, just because he's former, he still represents the, let's say, corporate ethos of the company he just left. And he's one of these people who is building the analytics/surveillance software that probably will influence whatever Google is planning to do in China. So this is the kind of people we're dealing with, is the people who have no real respect for human dignity and will make a point just because, you know, he hates Bitcoin. He wants to rant about Bitcoin, and doesn't matter who he's ranting against. It doesn't matter to him.
Yeah, like honestly, like that whole swatting incident was pretty bad, and yeah, it's just one of those things where, you know, you hate to see, and then to see somebody that's just like ignorant to the fact that, yeah, you know, just hiring a lawyer and doing the standard route of things is not going to actually help you. And that's like one of the major problems I think I see with, you know, not just these Google guys, but, you know, like so a lot of the blockchain guys. There's a lot of, you know, we see what we're trying to do, but we're lacking a little bit of this bigger picture of how things currently are a problem. And, you know, maybe it's just ignorance, but I mean, it's definitely stupid to just like mock him. And, you know, I mean, it's kind of interesting to actually go over Jameson Lopp's tweet that, you know, he was like presenting, which like we were just talking about, you know, should we get a cell phone? Like what cell phone? It's like Jameson Lopp, who's great at OPSEC, you know, just introducing this like extreme OPSEC where he says, I no longer have a quote, car, phone, house, credit card, credit score, driver's license, ISP. In 1 week, I'll present extreme OPSEC for the modern cypherpunk at Hodl Hodl BH 2018. And I mean, like, he's right on there. I mean, you know, like I got rid of the car, and I don't have credit cards or, you know, my credit score. I don't know how you can get rid of that. I don't have a driver's license. The phone and ISP I'm still stuck with. And, you know, this is where it's like, the move towards these actually like protecting yourself from some of this risk from the current system is it requires you to kind of go dark a little bit. But, you know, that might be for the best. I'll tell you, just switching from the car to the bike, I'm so much healthier. So, I mean, like maybe it's the same with the phone.
I mean, it'll depend. I mean, for a lot of people, like him saying that you can live without all of those things might appear extreme, but to be honest, for most people in the world who don't have that, this is just their daily life. Like most of them, I think the one thing that probably a lot more people will have on the list than the other things on the list is the phone. Like even people in third world countries have access to some kind of phone now. But the other things on the list, most people don't have them. And so it's like, it's not even really a going dark situation because like I said, like he's probably going to show it's possible to live without all of those things. And you can probably live a pretty normal life. Like I think I'm already 5 or 6 out of 7 of not having things on that list. So I'm already pretty close, and I live a relatively normal life outside of, you know, all of my privacy concerns.
Yeah, I mean, it really takes the experience to have the understanding. So I'm really interested to see.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Oh, did I cut out?
Wrecked.
I think, I don't know. It's always hard for me to tell if it was my connection or your connection, but I'm catching you now.
Yeah, you cut out for a sec, Janine.
Shinobi, I cut out.
Yeah, but you were saying you were right at, like, you know, you're getting along just fine with 5 or 7 of those devices.
Oh, I think I might be back.
Yep.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm probably already 5 or 6 out of 7 on that list of not having things, and I think it's entirely possible to live a normal life without having those things. I think it's just that most people that we know in our space, especially people that spend a lot of their time on Twitter, they probably, you know, a lot of this stuff is addicting. It's not that they can't get rid of it. It's because they're just emotionally, psychologically attached to it and what it gives them. So I think I'm frozen again. Am I still frozen?
Oh, you're here.
No, we can hear you.
Well, so that was basically it. It's more of a psychological addiction than it is an actual need.
Yeah, so I was just going to quickly comment. Yeah, it's like usually takes the experience to figure out, exactly how all that works, and you'll figure out whether the grass is greener once you get over there and you're experiencing it. So I'm really interested to hear Jameson's presentation there at Hodl. That'll be a good thing to watch. But since in the interest of time we're taking up a lot of time in discussion here, I'm going to go ahead and go into this next story here, where Bitgo is trying to make a move as far as building a custodial service for these institutional players, like we've been seeing, sort of. So, yeah, after our last episode on Wednesday, I went to the local blockchain meetup, and this was some pretty big news discussed because it's relevant to our region. Like Wyoming and Colorado have already made some names for themselves as being positive and friendly towards crypto, and now this news from South Dakota, which is a connecting state for those who aren't aware. And so since early this year, the company Bitgo has been working towards building out a custodial solution for their institutional customers. They first tried to acquire the $12 billion digital asset custodian Kingdom Trust back in January. However, that deal fell through in May once Kingdom Trust did some research and wanted to start building out their own custodial platform for cryptocurrencies. And after that deal fell apart, Belchi and company started working with regulators to build out their own solution. And now they've won a major first step in that direction with this new Bitgo Trust. And that was approved last Thursday by the South Dakota Division of Banking. And it gives them the go-ahead to move forward with the plans on developing a strong custodial solution for cold storage. And Chief Compliance and Legal Officer Shala Ali told CoinDesk, quote, "The trust company will enable us to offer a qualified custodial offering that is regulated, that has the money laundering and know your customer requirements. Our custodian offering already has money laundering and KYC requirements, but the trust is for institutional clients, especially for those who are registered advisors and broker dealers." She went on to say that just because it was approved in South Dakota, that, quote, "generally other states will give you reciprocity," and hold up, this word, it must be a legal word, reciprocity, in the sense that other states have money transmission laws and they'll exempt you from money transmission requirements. Now, even though the trust was rewarded to Bitgo, the general public has 30 days to file an appeal against this decision. So as long as no one files an appeal during this time period, Bitgo will begin development on the custodial solution. So this news is a little bit early for any real development, as it's just the first major win towards regulatory approval. The real work will begin on October 13th, a month from the announcement. And then later we could see them offering this custodial solution to their customers. So I'm not sure why they would wait to build out the development and how this trust was rewarded without a roadmap on how that would be developed. But maybe they do have a roadmap and aren't sharing it with us. Maybe they'll just hire Lap's company, Casa. I don't know. We'll have to wait and see what system they're planning on implementing and marketing to these institutional investors. Now, in an article from Coin Center News, they discussed the topic further, where CEO Mike Belchi stated that the cryptocurrency market needs fresh capital to initiate a new midterm rally and properly recover from its 80% correction this year. Mike Belchi says, quote, "What Bitcoin needs is fresh capital coming in, so we haven't seen a lot of new buyers coming in. So to the extent that Wall Street represents that, yes, Bitcoin needs that. And I could tell you anecdotally that the institutional herd is starting to move their feet a little bit, but they have been taking much longer than I expected. This custody product is making me much more optimistic, and this may be the solution that institutional investors have been waiting for." And the entrance of Bitgo into this institutional market of Bitcoin and the expansion of Coinbase crypto custody service, which was launched back in July, are expected to eliminate the final barrier between institutions and the crypto market that are preventing these institution investors from coming in. and committing to Bitcoin and crypto, but investors are still highly optimistic in the long-term growth of the market and what the cryptocurrency market would be like with the participation of pension funds, hedge funds, and a wide range of institutions. The article goes on to say how we reached an all-time high of around 20,000 without institutional investors. But I wonder if we still would have gotten that high without the Bitcoin futures. I mean, SegWit implementation was huge. It was big, but I don't know if that would have caused such a high rally in the price. I mean, like we jumped from around 2,900 or around that 3,000 mark before SegWit to 20,000. And I mean, like right about the same time those futures were released. And I'm not really sure how I feel about all these institutional players entering the space. I mean, it's kind of bittersweet in that, yeah, it raises the price, but at the same time, it allows, you know, some of the same bad actors from the current financial construct to try and sway development with large holdings and try and become the next, you know, major economic nodes, pushing the next 2x or something like that. But also, what about when one of these solutions fails? I mean, what will that do to us in the price? I imagine that eventually one will fail. And when one fails, I imagine that's going to be pretty bad. So, I mean, if it's, you know, started too early and raised too much money and gathered too many people, that could be a pretty big shock to the system. So, I don't know. To me, I'm thinking when we see real economic activity on the Lightning Network is when we'll snap out of this current trend. But who really knows? It's all speculation. The route to price rise involves some risk that I'm not sure is necessary. It's a solution that gets people to overlook the current trust problem in our current financial construct. However, I'm not sure if some of these older folks are going to figure that this trust thing is a problem. They also need safety from this possible economic downturn. So, I mean, you know, it's kind of like, I don't know how I feel about it. I mean, it's like they need safety, but I don't know if they're going to be able to figure this stuff out in time. It's hard to say definitively whether this is a good idea for the current time or if it's still too early. I'm not sure, even with the extreme cold storage, some of these legacy players would be happy with, you know, just having a digital balance and, you know, that's it. And the way that this whole system works, I think still kind of just freaks them out in general. But we'll see. I mean, Coinbase and Bitgo here are trying to build out these custodial service for these guys, you know, and I mean, they went the regulation route first, which I suppose, you know, that's just the way things are run here in the US is you got to pay off the people, the gatekeepers, right? And then you can start approaching the people on the streets are these investors. And so we'll see how it goes. I mean, I don't know. I'm like I'm saying, I feel like it might be a little too early, but at the same time, the way that Bitcoin development goes, it's almost like, yeah, this side of development's moving at the same pace as that side of, I mean, like the Lightning Network is moving fast, but so is Bitcoin privacy. And so is, you know, these regulations in different states and in different countries and self-regulatory organizations and the way that this thing's coming up. It's moving in parallel where a lot of things are being developed at once. So we'll see how it goes. We'll see how it plays out. You know, like I'm saying, eventually one of these things is going to be, you know, a failure. And when that happens, hopefully there's not too much Bitcoin wrapped up in that.
I wouldn't touch a Bitgo custodial product or even semi-custodial product with a 39.5-foot pole.
I'm honestly a lot more worried about the economic influence on consensus than the potential for a failure of something like this. I mean,
like the fact that Bitgo signed the NYA.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's like really unless they suffer major brain damage, I don't see any kind of systemic failure threat for a thing like this except some kind of insider theft. I mean, like if this is set up properly, then all of these keys are going to be completely air gapped from any network, and there is no risk at all except for physical theft of something. And I mean that practically speaking, that leaves some crazy Ocean's 11 heist or an insider stealing something. Like I'm not really that concerned with things like that. I'm much more concerned with the the potential that a lot of institutions like this are going to gain a lot of economic weight over the next few years, and then have a degree of influence on consensus that I'm not really comfortable with.
I don't even think it would take an insider as to threaten the safety of the coins, because one thing that some developers are not very good at is using secure messaging tools to share binaries unsigned.
Well, I mean, yeah, but if you're like I do not see any kind of product like this doing anything except hardware security module based management and keeping that completely air gapped with a very tight security policy for signing anything. I mean, like we're talking like a custodian solution for major financial firms or like family funds. Like this is not something like a consumer facing exchange where they're going to need to sign things rapidly and process withdrawals. Like I don't see this being set up in any other way except needing actual person to person confirmation of something and going through a long series of security checks before being physically signed by a person. And I mean, it's the idea of anything but an insider or some crazy like physical heist being a threat to the security of these coins. It just seems completely unrealistic to me. I think the much more pressing matter is over the next 5 to 10 years, as companies start establishing things like this, how is that going to kind of reshuffle the cards in terms of economic influence on consensus rules?
I hope you're right, man. I mean, like, I kind of just worry more or less like about, like we were discussing earlier about, Google, don't be evil early on. And, those guys try to weasel their way into these systems pretty early with an agenda in the long game. And, I don't know what that is, but I mean, like, we've definitely seen them construct financial products that wreak havoc in the long run. And I mean, like, we're hoping that they're going to build out this custodial thing to where it is, relatively solid, but I mean, you know, we're going to have to wait and see what they're building actually. Cause I mean, yeah, I mean, if we get a clear sign of like, hey, this thing looks really secure. I mean, yeah, but I just worry about that whole like side of, these guys are working with a lot of these guys from traditional places, but I know a lot of those guys are kind of understanding that the system's a problem and, maybe they're working with this in the good intention. I just worry about, you're working with people that have built financial instruments to hurt people in the past. So think about that a little bit.
Mm-hmm. All right, we know what that sound means.
Let's move along, man. And let's get Google out of this conversation. Sorry to bring those things back up, guys.
All right, so
Google is always in the conversation when you're on YouTube.
All right, so Bloomberg on the 12th or 13th is citing an anonymous source in claiming that Morgan Stanley is going to be working on some synthetic derivatives for Bitcoin. And so I think this kind of just
I just crickets. Like I was gonna make a snoring noise. I was waiting for you to pause. Like seriously, what the fuck is synthetic derivatives? Do we need to get Tone Vase in here to tell us what that is? Because he doesn't trade Bitcoin, so he definitely knows what derivatives are.
It's just something that tracks the price without actually interacting with the underlying. Like the CME futures, like those are like
or that
technically
non-deliverable forward that Goldman Sachs is working on.
Like anything that's collateralized with something other than the underlying asset. But like this, I think just kind of fits into like the general vibe that the legacy financial system has kind of been giving off regarding the Bitcoin ecosystem for the past couple of months. I mean, it's very clear at this point that they're interested in testing the waters, but specifically with key management, like it's not something they seem to be prepared for to directly deal with Bitcoin, and especially given the regulatory concerns and the very strict requirements for custodianship that a lot of financial institutions have, which obviously Bitgo is now the first approved company to kind of address that issue or side of things. But I really think we're going to start seeing a lot more of this from a lot of banks and financial institutions to kind of just gauge, their customers' attitude towards things. I mean, if you can kind of set up futures or derivatives like this that don't actually deal with the underlying, it's as far as the consumer who's more interested in fiat profit goes, it's really the same thing. You can expose yourself to the same kind of gains. You can expose yourself to a short as on a spot market, somebody who had Bitcoin selling them at what they think would be a top would be. And I mean, just kind of gauge the market's response to that and slowly kind of start moving in the direction that companies like Goldman and Bakkt seem to be going into, where it's kind of just testing out the waters and seeing if it's really worth it from their point of view and with their specific customers to really continue building out these products towards the end goal of directly dealing with the assets themselves. I mean, it's like there's just a lot of stuff that they have to worry about.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's trying to get these derivatives because they don't want to interact with the underlying because of their, ideas of what trust is and how money's issued and what property means. I feel like it is like a bigger, misunderstanding when it comes to why they don't want to get involved with Bitcoin directly. It's just, so far outside of the way that they do things that it's just like they don't really, they don't like the idea. So I don't know what it's going to take, but I mean, like for right now, they're loving their derivatives. I mean, like everybody's coming up with one. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Citibank coming up with one, and all these major people that are involved on Wall Street coming up with some sort of derivative in time. So yeah, this is like, it's just a slow release of all these separate derivatives. I mean, they're all being talked about, and I think they're, for the most part, there's at least the backed and the non-deliverable forward from Goldman Sachs that are being worked on, and the futures have already launched. I mean, it's going to be something in the future for sure, where we'll start seeing most of these derivatives all kind of come together and launch maybe at a similar time, similar way. Like, remember the CME futures were the first to say that they were going to launch, and then the CBOE like immediately after was like, yeah, we're going to launch too, like around the same time, but a little bit earlier. So like, maybe once one gets announced that they're going to be being released, we might see like all of them fall out at once.
Mm-hmm. I mean, on one side, like, I don't really like the idea of these unbacked products kind of introducing themselves into the market and affecting the general market psychology and how people are going to react and trade. But on the other side, I don't think it's an entirely negative thing to have products like this be built out and kind of attract some of that liquidity indirectly, while not really creating a situation where players like this are going to wind up actually holding large amounts of Bitcoin itself, unless they start moving into the spot markets to try to manipulate things. Like people who just engage with products like this, they'll gain the exposure and the potential for profit, but they're not necessarily going to be amassing coins to the point where they're going to become entities, economically speaking, that have an influence on the consensus process. And like really that's one of the biggest kind of double-edged swords that we're going to have to deal with over the next 5 years, is a lot of these kinds of pools of liquidity. They're going to work their way in here. And I mean, it's really kind of necessary to continue growth of the asset value but at the same time, it's not really a good thing if institutions like this wind up amassing a huge amount of coins that they can use to then influence the consensus building process. And I mean, ultimately, this really just comes down to hodlers and people holding on to their coins in the long term and not just selling them off to people like this and kind of shifting the landscape of who's really influencing the consensus of this network.
Well, I just want to say that, 2018 in general is a special year because it's now 10 years past the 2008 financial crisis. But today, actually, no, it was yesterday. Damn it. One day off. September 15th. Yesterday was the 10th anniversary of the Lehman Brothers declaring bankruptcy. So, yeah, Morgan Stanley, we remember you. And apparently, Jamie Dimon is thinking of running for president. That is funny. That is not going to happen. Wow. If that does happen, I will really never go back to that country.
Yeah, we already got the head of ExxonMobil as our VP, right? I mean, like, I don't know. This next presidential election is shaping up to be a real battle royale of personalities.
It's just funny because it's like, guys, like, calm the fuck down. We already know that you control a large aspect of the government. That's how you got the bailout and all that. Like, we already know that you control them. You don't actually have to be them. That's a bit too much for people, okay? Just stay in the background. Be shady.
Mm-hmm.
Until they're irrelevant.
All right, though. Slide along a little bit. We've kind of, a number of different times over the last year or so since the Chinese exchange shutdown, been talking about a number of different exchanges that have tried to branch out internationally. And specifically Huobi, which has tried to move into Hong Kong, Korea, Japan, the United States. And I believe, if I remember correctly, they even opened an office in London. They have acquired a majority stake in Japanese exchange BitTrade, which is fully licensed and one of the exchanges that was involved in the self-regulatory organization being established in Japan. And so this kind of opens the door here for Huobi to expand into Japan now as a licensed entity. And yeah, I think this is really the first Chinese exchange that has kind of gotten a foothold in Japan. And one of the things that the CEO Chris Lee has been talking about is the owner of BitTrade, Eric Cheng, has kind of had a lot of his reputation build up by sourcing high quality digital assets. It kind of boils down to finding deals in ICOs and pre-sales and so on and so forth. But looking at this, obviously, like now they can kind of take BitTrade and open up shop in Japan and start repatriating some of the profits that the exchange makes in Japan. But the way that they kind of specifically point out Eric Cheng's involvement in air quotes sourcing high quality digital assets, this makes me kind of wonder, like, really how bad this crunched their books, having to shut down the domestic operations in China, and what they might do to kind of make up for lost profit. And I mean, like right now, the exchange that they've got a majority share and it's licensed. It's part of a self-regulatory organization in Japan. But just looking at this, it really makes me wonder if that Chinese business attitude of kind of pushing the envelope as far as what's allowed might be imported to Japan, and how that's really going to play out for this exchange and their license in the long term. if instead of just kind of opening shop and eating the loss that having to shut down their operations resulted in, you know, leads to them kind of playing fast and loose to make up money instead. Cricket.
Oh man, I was just gonna, yeah, I didn't know if you were finishing off right there or not, but yeah, I mean, it's you know, all Japan just moving forward, and yeah, I mean, it's this Chinese exchange Bitrade that seems to have been doing some positive developments for a while, and I guess it's similar to Silicon Valley tactics, and just the way that general capitalism works right now, as far as just like acquiring the guys that are moving on up. And so Huobi is, yeah, I guess they're going to be opening an office there in Japan, or is Huobi already in Japan and they're bringing in Bitrade? Which one was? Which way did it
They
go?
have a majority share in Bitrade now, so they can effectively use that. I'm expecting this is probably going to lead to a rebranding and kind of just a little bit of shuffling around in the Bitrade operations under the Huobi flag.
Right, we might be seeing Huobi Trade or Huobi Bit in a merger or a takeover, or however it goes. But yeah, I mean, like I've seen some other stories similar where it's bigger exchanges, going in to acquire smaller exchanges. We've seen, Coinbase buying Earn.com. It's we're not outside the realm of the way that these companies develop and move forward. So yeah, I mean, just good news for the Asian markets over there, that things are coming together. I mean, I hope. I mean, Huobi and Bitrade. I don't really know much about either of those exchanges, other than Huobi is pretty big in their their who they are. So I mean, like, it'll be an interesting development. But for right now, I don't know. This is just the growth of the space. Everybody's trying to build up their stock of talent. So
I guess not really much to the Huobi story. Just kind of have to see how that plays out. But in other news, tomorrow is going to be the ruling by the Supreme Court of India on the ban of interaction with fiat institutions that the Reserve Bank of India instituted for cryptocurrency exchanges. And there's been a lot of reports kind of about the arguments the Reserve Bank has been making. They're pretty much just trying to just go full retard in arguing that cryptocurrencies are completely illegitimate in all aspects. And I mean, the first part of the argument that they're making, it's obviously what they've been arguing since they issued the circular, is that cryptocurrencies fall short of being true currencies. And it's pretty much just like that there is nothing legally speaking that qualifies it as a currency. And they're just continuing to push this argument and drawing examples that, it's just not like government money. And they've kind of pushed this to an even further extreme. And they're trying to argue that because a cryptocurrency is a peer-to-peer network that isn't controlled by a service provider, that they can't even be considered a valid payment system. So they've kind of gone, from the initial argument, which to a degree makes sense. Like it's not a currency. It's not recognized as such under legal tender laws. It's not backed by a government. But like now they're literally trying to say that it's not even a payment system because there is no central authority that's operating. And I mean, like, this to me is like probably one of the most desperate, lines of argumentation I've seen from any kind of financial institution or authority, like anywhere in the world that I can think of. I mean, even China is like is not going this full retard. They've just shut down fiat to crypto exchange. and like they're not making these kind of stupid arguments. Like they've just kind of slowly started pushing it out of the country and working on establishing their own private systems to emulate it. But like they haven't sunk to this level of just intellectual nonsense. I mean, it's like it is a distributed system. It clearly processes payments. That is the entire core function of it. And like I honestly, looking at this line of argumentation, I'm not sure whether to read this as like their back is in a corner and they're just taking this to the furthest extreme possible because of the perception or notion that they might have this eventually reversed tomorrow based on the Supreme Court's ruling, or if they're just really trying to drive this home as kind of a narrative to push if the Supreme Court upholds their ban and pretty much just stamps out the entire cryptocurrency market in India. But I mean, it's like this is really going to be a very important day tomorrow for people living in India. And like it's very unclear really how this is going to play out based on these arguments. I mean, it's like it's a fine line between a narrative to push to the people after the fact or just complete desperation because they're unable to actually back up their argumentation here. I mean, like they couldn't even, like in a public document release, like they admitted they had done almost zero research into any of this before issuing this ban.
Yeah, I mean, the first question I would ask is if they don't even think it's a payment network, then what do they actually think it is? Like, if you say something is not a thing, well, you still have to define what actually is. So how do you define it? If they can't even find a way to define it without going back to the similar terminology that would basically qualify it as a payment network, well, then they're just making up bullshit. The second thing is, does them saying it's not a currency or payment network actually, does that even impact like exchanges? Does that mean they can't operate cryptocurrency exchanges anymore in India? Like, I don't see if that would directly affect that, because there's a lot of countries where they've said it's not, or Bitcoin and stuff is not a currency, and yet there's still exchanges there and nothing happened.
Well, I mean, but the entire context of this is over the Reserve Bank banning any cryptocurrency business from interacting with a bank or a fiat payment processor. So I mean, like right now, it's impossible for more fiat capital inflow. And I mean, long term, without that, like this entire market in India is going to collapse. I mean, if they're forced to literally do nothing but crypto to crypto, trading, it's a completely different dynamic. Like fiat to crypto,
or fiat. Like, I mean, yeah, well, they've banned a number of things in terms of, their currency and what you can and can't do with it, and it still happens regardless. I mean, I'm assuming people would just shift to do it. I'm assuming they would shift from person to person.
It was like that will destroy all of the companies in India. Like if you're dealing with fiat to crypto in India, that's a local business, like that's confined to that country. The competition is occurring within the country. If you're dealing with crypto to crypto trading, like you're competing with every company in the entire world that does that. There is no geographic boundary there. And the competition is much higher and much more intense. And without like fiat capital inflow, like I don't think a lot of these businesses will be able to keep their operations going. Like this really could have serious effects to these companies in this country.
And while you're talking, I'm like searching around, looking at India's exchanges and volumes, and on Uno Coin's website, it says at the top, Indian rupee deposits and withdrawals through bank accounts are temporarily disabled as per RBI directive dated April 6, 2018. and it's something that we've been covering for a while as as a bad thing that's going on there in India for these guys that are trying to actually build out the space. And like similarly, the way the United States sort of puts in regulations that could stifle innovation and keep people behind. Part of me always kind of wonders with big markets like where gold is being used and gold is being a pretty big part of the economy. Kind of makes me wonder if there's like even a pushback from, like the RBI is doing this because they don't want to get off of gold. They got a large amount of gold holdings, but it could be like you're saying, Shinobi, and tomorrow they announce that it's over and people can start using their banks again with crypto. But yeah, it's pretty disturbing thing, and I mean it's good to see that it's on the end deadline of this whole directive from the RBI, and hopefully we'll see a overturning of it, and these businesses can get back to it. Because I mean, like from what I'm seeing, I'm not really seeing much volume going through India right now, and I imagine it has a lot to do with this directive. So yeah, I'll definitely be keeping my eye on the news and fingers crossed that they can keep moving forward without having to worry about some sort of regulation coming down telling them they can't do something.
I mean, it's just gonna have to wait and see what happens tomorrow.
We will see, man. We will see. Hopefully, fingers crossed.
All right, well, I guess next up, just a real short update. The European Central Bank Friday released a report, and they've officially said that there is no concrete need to issue their own central bank digital currency. And then the research that they did for this report, they kind of looked at the fact that almost 80% of payments in the EU are still using cash. And it's one of the specific quotes from the paper is, "This seems to challenge the perception that cash is rapidly being replaced by cashless means of payments."
Wait, weren't we just telling someone this like a week or two ago, and they didn't believe us, and they blocked everyone who was saying this was the case? Yeah, surprise everyone. Cash is the majority medium of exchange in Europe. Like, surprise. Apparently, that was a surprise to some people, to the point where they made stupid bets and then didn't even honor their bets.
Some people don't like to do their research.
All right.
Some people, no. I'm not even going to use the word research for that, because all it took some people was one search term, going to one website and clicking on a link. I would not consider that research. That is kind of just looking.
That's not my gut. I do gut research.
All right, though. Wrap it up, though. Yeah, it's still a majority of payments in Europe are cash, and it's not really infrastructure or anything to build this out. And I'm assuming that, like a number of central banks who have researched into this, they've kind of realized the huge systemic effects that this would have on financial markets and businesses. And it would pretty much just radically restructure the entire way the economy works in terms of money issuance and capital flow and debt issuance. And given how massive financial services are in terms of proportion of the economy in the West, I mean, this is pretty much just not a viable idea. Like a large number of central banks doing this would pretty much crash the entire economy by introducing government monopolies that compete with financial services, which make up most of the economy in the developed West. And so, all the people out there who look at Bitcoin and immediately go, the central banks are going to do this. No, they're not, because to do so would pretty much implode the world economy. And that's not something that they're going to do willy-nilly, even though their own stupidity is slowly driving them towards it anyway. They don't want to get blamed for doing it intentionally.
Yeah, I mean, let's stay away from all the Fed coin ideas. like that.
Mm-hmm. And next story up, I think we are down to the last four. Ransomware is back in the news again and not going anywhere. There is a small town in Ontario in Canada, Midland, who had their town council computer systems compromised. And this pretty much for 48 hours destroyed government email services, prevented processing of payments, the issuance of permits for all of the municipal reasons that you would need to do so, processing of marriage cards. It even shut down the ability to reload transit cards. So this pretty much ground this entire town's public infrastructure to a complete halt. And in the end, although the amounts have not been disclosed, they have pretty much decided to pay at the advice of the security experts who they actually brought in to deal with this. And I will note, though, fire response, waste management, I'm assuming as well, emergency services such as police were not affected. But I mean, this just like this is not a problem that is going to go away. And I think that this example really shows like how bad this can get. I mean, most of the instances of ransomware we've seen are people's home computers with just a virus spreading around all over the place and hitting a bunch of individuals. The instance in the UK where the National Health Services was hit, the big wave, I think, in I'm probably screwing the date up here. I think it was late 2016 or early 2017. A large amount of major corporations, such as FedEx in the US, were hit. And then the BART instance in San Francisco, I believe, where the entire BART train system was shut down. I mean, this is literally an entire town now. This isn't isolated pieces of infrastructure. This isn't a single company or your home computer with your family photos. This is literally an entire town's public services minus emergency services being shut down. And this goes to show not only the ability to use ransomware to pretty much abscond with a large amount of bitcoins out of this, but just the general state of computer security in the world. I mean, if you really step back from the crypto ecosystem for a minute and just look at this, imagine you're at war with somebody, and this is how open your computer systems are. An entire town just shut down like that.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, like somebody was talking to me the other day about computer security and how could they remain more secure, and I was just like, it's kind of a bleak picture. I mean, it's not really that easy. It's definitely not easy. And you screw up one place, you're liable to open a hole to where your information is you've been compromised. And yeah, I mean, like, how long is it going to take before they realize that instead of just paying people off, they should build out new, better encrypted systems to avoid these type of attacks? I'm not sure. I mean, we have seen through a large wave of those attacks last year that got paid off. Nobody got their, well, I mean, like a large percentage of people that paid off the ransom didn't get their information decrypted. So yeah, and this stuff's just going to become more sophisticated, right? I mean, like somebody is going to build this thing out even a little bit more efficient to where it's going to avoid, critical infrastructure that could liably get them in a lot of trouble. And they're going to be going after simply, old outdated systems. I think that was the big wave last year, was a large wave of Windows XP systems that weren't updated. And yeah, I mean, it's going to continue to evolve. It's one of the reasons, yeah, that it's almost like a continuation of the crypto wars. It's just like it just continues. It's like there'll always be a battle between encryption and decryption, and this is like right now the encryption is pretty powerful. If you could figure out a way to get into somebody's system, compromise it, encrypt it, it'd be very difficult for them to decrypt it. without the private key. So I mean, like, yeah, this is something where hopefully the market will wake up and say, like, maybe we should come up with stronger encryption than just worrying about paying these people off. Like, I mean, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, I would call things like this a necessary evil, and pretty much like a virus triggering your immune response. I mean, cryptocurrencies here are effectively functioning as a canary in the coal mine for security vulnerabilities. And I mean, it's yeah, it sucks. There's going to be a lot of money lost and a lot of people hurt in the process. But at the end of the day, when it's done burning through the systems, that economic incentive to exploit these things instead of just sit on them and hold that in your exploit deck for some future use, hopefully is going to lead to most of these exploits in all the computer systems in the world being found and patched. And I mean, this is a problem that people have been struggling with since computers were first invented. And ultimately, I think things like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency are that final piece of the puzzle and actually trying to solve these things on a massive scale. Like it's providing an economic incentive to actually exploit these things to make them publicly known. And it's just something we're going to have to deal with. And another reason to make sure you're backing up all of your data somewhere that's not on a live computer.
Yes. Let's weed out all the backdoors. I like that idea. It's one of the other reasons I like Bitcoin, of the many.
Mm-hmm. All right. So third to last story. It's a little bit of a love story. So for anybody who remembers, last year, Ripple Labs and R3 got embroiled in a huge lawsuit over a contract Ripple Labs had with R3 to sell a billion XRP to R3 for 2 years since the contract was signed, I believe, for an eighth of a penny per Ripple that Ripple Labs attempted to break when R3 went to exercise this right in the contract, under the grounds that R3 had not helped Ripple Labs shill Ripple to all the banks that R3 was working. Well, this case has apparently settled in court, and whatever agreement they've reached will remain confidential, and we'll never know. But I'm going to imagine that this involves some money changing hands from Ripple Labs to R3 because it's a pretty clear contract clause that gave them the right to purchase that at a fixed price. And I think this was pretty much Ripple realizing, oh shit, this is worth a lot more money now. No. And given the fact that a large amount of their Ripple holdings are actually time locked, I'm betting that a big part of this was the fact they didn't have immediate access to the Ripple that R3 wanted to purchase at the time. So I guess, some drama happened. Some drama resolved itself. And my nosy ass and your nosy asses that want to know what happened, I guess we'll never find out. Ta-da.
Yeah, it's classified, man. Behind closed doors, we won't know.
I just really want to know whether R3 has decided whether it's was it called Corda. I want to know if they've decided whether it's a blockchain or not because they keep going back and forth. They're really indecisive. I wonder if that led to this this issue.
Yeah, those guys are pretty lost.
All right, but yeah, I'm betting this just involved Ripple paying them off to sweep one issue they're dealing with under the rug as they flail around trying to justify how they're not a security, which they are. So, next one. This is something, unless you've been around in the space for a while, you might not even know about. But Josh Garza is a name that any OGs watching should remember from many, many years ago, around 2014. Started a business, Gaw Miners, to sell Bitcoin mining equipment. After being ripped off for a large amount of mining equipment he purchased himself. And this company wildly spun out of control very quickly, moving into a cloud mining service, offering hashlets that would always be making money out of mining profits. Then wound up launching their own shitcoin, Paycoin, with the promise of a $20 per coin price floor that he would prop up with $100 million in cash reserves. They didn't exist. And effectively, the SEC got involved in 2015, and as things just unraveled, it came out that he was effectively running a Ponzi scheme, and that the mining equipment backing Gaw miners and their cloud mining services rapidly became outdated and unprofitable. So, despite making very bold promises with selling cloud mining contracts, he wound up in a position where he was completely unable to pay. Launched his shitcoin to try to fill in those budget gaps, and it was pretty much just him taking money from people and paying off earlier investors until the entire scheme just imploded around him. And he has been sentenced to 21 months in prison and 3 years of supervised release, as well as $9 million in restitution for the people that he's defrauded. And so, yeah, the legal system doesn't move quickly. This is something that was going on just after the Mt. Gox collapse, and it is just now in 2018 finally coming to a close. So anybody out there who actually got burned by this, if people are watching who've been around that long, there you go. Fucker got what he had coming. But just another note, with all of the ICO nonsense going on right now, and people acting like, things are just going to skate by under the rugs, people are going to just walk away with bags of money after all this. I just want to point to this as an example of just how slow bureaucracy works. Just because something isn't happening now, a year later, after the whole ICO mania that was 2017, it really doesn't mean shit. Like, whether it's next year, 2-3 years from now, 5 years, eventually the SEC is going to start digging through the pile of shit on their desk, and they're going to start actually doing things about it. Like, this is just how that kind of machine works. It takes time, but it eventually gets around to it.
And hopefully it will incentivize some of those people who still try to push cloud mining contracts like Kodak. It's just trying to stop that, man. It's like what we've just seen, the recent prosecution of that ICO based on diamonds. Now that this judgment has come down and waiting on the
Wrecked.
As far as just like sort of, I'm wrecked.
There we go. Now you're
check. Am I still here?
Yeah, better now.
All right, man. So yeah, it's going to serve its purpose as far as trying to dissuade people from continuing to do these like blatantly cheap scams and try and just push out vaporware.
Mm-hmm. All right. Anything to pop in, Janine, before we move along?
I was just reading something that popped up in my feed about how a bunch of banks like JP Morgan Chase are shutting people's bank accounts down just because of, quote, reputational risks, as in if they get, if they basically appear in Google News alerts or something, even if they haven't committed any crimes, but they may have done something that might, I don't know, be termed risque. They get
You
their
mean
bank
like
accounts
that
shut.
9-year-old kid who they thought was a money laundering risk?
Yep. Except they're doing it to, more people than just 9-year-olds.
All right.
Maybe they'll come to Bitcoin once they realize censorship is a problem.
All right. Well, last story. Ethereum is finally getting around to publicizing a proposal to replace the EVM, the Ethereum virtual machine. And so just real quick, if anybody doesn't really get what that means, at the heart of any cryptocurrency, you pretty much have a virtual machine. Like that is pretty much the heart of any node out there. Like, Bitcoin has one, Ethereum has one, even Ripple. Like that is the machine that takes consensus data, checks the current state of all the data structures, and then verifies that the data it's just received and is processing is following the consensus rules. Like that is the heart of what makes these systems work, aside from the data structures like a blockchain. And Ethereum's EVM is a gigantic fucking shit show. Like this is a big part of all of the gigantic cluster fucks that have been going on. It's got a lot of weird oddities. I believe everything in the EVM has to pretty much be set up as a 256-bit string. The Solidity language actually compiles down to the EVM code, and that's been a big source of problems as far as people doing stupid things. And this proposal is called EWASM, and it's pretty much implementing an analog of WebAssembly, which is something being worked on by the W3C consortium. And pretty much they're trying to take a lot of the stupid oddities in the current EVM that require a lot of reserialization and translation of code into different formats and boiling it down to actual, CPU instructions. And right off the bat, try to get the core language the EVM is interpreting much more in line with the actual CPU instructions on the hardware level, and setting things up so that you can compile down to this from a number of different languages. And, obviously the reasoning here is remove a lot of the stupidity with things like Solidity, make things a lot more efficient in terms of getting rid of a lot of the translation that needs to be done to actually get down to the bottom of the stack where your CPU is running something and validating it. But there's already some drama going on with this. Somebody else, what was his name? Nick Johnson, I believe, had been working on a refinement of the current EVM to fix a lot of issues lately, and recently had pretty much all of his funding pulled from the Ethereum Foundation, not too long before this new proposal was being pushed. And this is honestly kind of just like slapping a new coat of paint on a dilapidated Model T. I mean, you're going to gain some efficiency here, but at the end of the day, it's not really addressing the core scalability issues of the entire platform, which is effectively redundantly having to compute all of these contracts on every single node on the network in order to reach consensus on the current state of the network. And to boot, the way they're kind of structuring this, where you're effectively talking about compiling down to this new EVM assembly code in any number of languages, you're pretty much making a compiler a single point of failure here. And anybody who actually writes a smart contract, compiles it down, and deploys it on the network, all you have to do to fuck with it is just fuck with the compiler and compromise the compiler. And you can compromise the entire script that actually winds up deployed on the network. And so obviously they're
my own compiler.
but obviously they're running around memeing this and trying to tie it in with proof of stake and sharding, and are planning on deploying it on a test shard with the proof of stake. But ultimately this is just PR memes. Like, look at us, we're air quote fixing fundamental issues and ignoring the fact that really the issues aren't the implementation, it's the entire architecture is fucking broken. And I mean, they're just scrambling around trying to keep up the appearance that they're actually solving unsolvable problems to try and keep the market afloat. And I mean, it's like this is just, it's getting completely fucking ridiculous at this point. Like I'm really sitting here with my popcorn wondering how much nonsense they can come up with to continue convincing people to put their money in Ethereum.
Yeah, I've kind of got a little bit of a different outlook now. Just like, I mean, like, I understand what you're saying. You're right about the EVM and the the consensus mechanisms and the way that it, all the way goes down to the bottom of the stack, and how do you upgrade this system without completely overhauling it and looking at it. But now it's like I've got these friends here in town that are trying to solve some problems through what they think Ethereum could bring them, and kind of worry with like the whole break things type development attitude of like, we've got a foundation, we can formulate consensus, we could move fast and break things. I mean, like, we've seen a little bit of like them discussing like parity bailout as like something where there might be some pushback in the next update. But I mean, like, that's still not it's not like out of the books yet. I mean, they're still figuring out a way if they could do that. And it looks like the proof of stake test shard, that's what they were discussing. Like, it's pretty funny. I was at that, like I said earlier in the show, I was at that blockchain meetup last week, and they were talking about how they were, a couple of the guys were at Burning Man, and like, they were with this like crypto camp, and, I mean, like, they're having a good time. And like, some of them, like, I think that, with that, I've got a friend here that's trying to work on helping reward open source development and, try and guide that sort of thing. And, I'm not 100% that, that's something that has to be there, but I mean, like, it's something that might serve a useful purpose. And it's just like, a lot of it right now, I kind of feel the tension in his thoughts as far as like, was this right, to do this, or should I, we maybe think about doing it with something else? And, I mean, it's kind of, filling out those guys. It's like I said to them this past week, I'm not sitting on the sidelines with popcorn hoping for the failure. I'm honestly sitting on the sidelines just watching with the mate. I know you are, but it's like, I've got to talk to these guys. And like the serious thing is, like, whenever ETH decided that they were going to bail out the DAO, we all laughed at how pretty stupid that was. And then the ETC ETH fork happened, and it was something that did sort of show us what hard fork and splitting the network can do. And that's similarly, it's just like I'm watching with amazement as the experiment plays out. Like, there's definitely some research there as far as like the guys there were saying, like, they don't like Raiden and Lightning channels to try and fix their problems, so they're going to try to do this proof of stake sharding. I really think this is just in turn to try and fight EOS's delegated proof of stake in the way that they do things. I saw a video from Vitalik just recently about how, he was with the Zcash guy, or it was a video produced by Zcash talking about how delegated proof of stake has got failure, like, just baked into the mechanisms of block producers. And I mean, similarly, right, it's like with a foundation and, starting a coin, a currency with a figurehead and all that, it really does lead to problems from the base out. And so, how long is it going to take for some people to recognize that and move forward in a direction? I don't know. I mean, like you're saying, I mean, there's definitely some people where it's kind of a popcorn moment. But I definitely have some friends here in town where I hope they can get moving forward with their projects in a tenable way and something that's not so just like held up in the air through a foundation in the way that they decide to scale.
Popcorn.
It's definitely going to be some popcorn there, just like in the amazement, really. Like, honestly, whenever the ETH fork happened, or forget that, when the DAO hack happened, I thought that was the most punk rock thing I'd ever seen. Like, I remember like being excited, like kind of like, what the hell? Like, kind of pumping my fists. Like, it's crazy. This guy can totally take over, through, just like the understanding that this is shoddy code and understanding that, there was a way to, recurse that contract to where it would come back at him and he would just keep filling up his wallet. And, and then like the freeze of it and the, what do we do? The holy nightmare of it, seeing like, a multi-billion, like, I don't even know whether it was billion. Like, I mean, Ethereum was pretty big, right? I mean, like, there's a lot of money involved, and like seeing that much money being involved with out like real controls on it was awesome. So, I mean, like, similarly, I mean, like, this is like where I'm watching with popcorn.
Alrighty then. I guess that wraps her up for the day, and into final thoughts we go. Race, you two.
Well, I have mine up there, and
He already beat me.
my thought is just that I don't know how many people who are watching the show are familiar with Archelect, but it's basically a Twitter account that tweets out images and videos, which may not sound super interesting, but actually the person who made it so that it's a very interactive bot, and it will actually post things that get more engagement from people. I think it posts to Instagram, and Twitter is the most popular, I think. But basically what happens is that if, 1,000 people like one image and only 500 people like another image, it's basically going to trawl the web and find other images that are similar colors or themes or what have you to the image that got more engagement. So it's a really cool interactive bot. There's a Medium post about it's like an interview with the person who made it, who just goes by Pack, on how it works. And I think it's pretty cool. So it's about to cross 1 million followers on Twitter. So if you want to get a bunch of random images that are mostly gray, I've noticed, and there's a reason for that. That's explained in the Medium post about how it works. Check it out.
Alrighty, Rick, you're up.
Again, man, I'm gonna check that out. I like, me, I like images, I like Archelect. That'll be fun. So yeah, I'm just gonna post this link. Let me see, were you gonna post that in the chat? We got a guy in town that's been coming to our regular meetups here in Boulder, and he's Blockbane on Twitter, and he's been recently acquired this Denver Bitcoin and Beer meetup, which just like a quick rundown on the history here in Colorado. There was a Bitcoin meetup a long time ago, around 2013, 2014 in Denver, and then that kind of got gobbled up by Rocky Mountain blockchain, and then kind of became ETH Denver. So there is no real Bitcoin meetup in Denver. However, this Bitcoin and Beer meetup is really like, we're trying to bring out the Bitcoiners there in Denver. So it'd be great if you guys, like, this is tomorrow. It's tomorrow evening. It's at a local brewery or bar down there in Denver. It's going to be a nice little get together of just like people that are really into Bitcoin. Like, it'd be nice to have that sort of, that model there in Denver too. Like right now it's an interesting model here in Boulder where we kind of got like the blockchain meetup, the Bitcoin meetup, and the Ethereum meetup. And like, we kind of just, cross paths. We all kind of, visit one another and talk and discuss. Where right now in Denver, it's pretty much run by blockchain and Ethereum. So it would be great if you're in the Denver area and, you're around tomorrow, you don't have much plans to just go have a drink. That would be great. With Blockbane over there. He's a great guy who, He knows what he's doing. So that's going on tomorrow. And, like I've been saying, this downtrend really does play like a positive benefit for these meetups too. You're going to go and you're not going to meet a bunch of people that are just, speculative crazy. You're going to go meet the guys that are actually like really passionate about this. So like really, get to meetups before the next bull market and wherever you're at, do your local meetups. And just go ahead and let you know as well, if you're in the Boulder area, we're going to have another meetup on Tuesday. This upcoming Tuesday, we'll be at a local brewery, and we'll just have a few drinks. And like you're saying, it's local Bitcoiners in the area. So, please get out there and support your local meetups. And, let's, build this network on the ground. And, just a quick shout out and thanks to our people that are helping with Block Digest and people that are helping us with some donations here and there. So I really appreciate that too. So that's my final thought. That's it.
Whoever has been active in that over the last month, you know who you are. We appreciate it, and we'll definitely try to find some good use to put that to. And I guess on a final note, here's a meme. Sorry, audio listeners. I have decided I'm going to only meme using copyrighted materials from now on because the EU Parliament can suck my memes. Catch you guys on Wednesday.
Don't you mean memes?